A good amount of sunshine lasting well into the afternoon across parts of Scotland and then into northern England, central England by the afternoon. But for all of us, we've got this northerly breeze that's going to be bringing some snow showers to the north coast of Scotland and a much chillier feel. So temperatures quite a few degrees down on Sunday, and it will feel cool across any North Sea coasts. Staying cool throughout Monday, but we'll see fewer showers around, so a drier and probably a sunnier day than Sunday on Monday. I'll see you later.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Saturday Morning with Esther and Phil here on GB News. We've got lots coming up for you this morning.
Conservative MP Sir Christopher Chope will be joining us to discuss his debate yesterday in Parliament on vaccine damage payments.
And during lockdown, many parents felt their children's education was abandoned. 3 years on and life hasn't got back to normal. Journalist Harriet Sargent will be here joining us to tell us about these now so-called ghost children.
And we'll be looking through today's papers with journalist Carol Malone and TV chef Kevin Woodford.
And as ever this morning, we want to hear from you, so get involved with the show. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. But before we start, here's the latest headlines with Bethany.
Esther and Phil, thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The head of the Fire Brigade Union is calling for mass non-cooperation and non-compliance with the government's new anti-strike laws. The minimum service level bill would give ministers the power to force certain union members in key sectors to work on strike days or face losing their jobs. FBU General Secretary Matt Rack says the bill is one of the most draconian attacks on the rights of working people in decades. He's urging the Trades Union Congress to hold an emergency meeting to launch a joint strategy to resist the legislation.
To basically force workers to cross picket lines which are being manned by their colleagues. A, I think it is completely unprincipled and unethical, and B, I just don't think it would work. The idea that workers are going to be strong-armed into breaking a strike that they've voted for, I think is just fanciful. So in the end, I think this bill, it certainly is a backward bill, and it's going to inflame the situation and, in my view, make the strife even worse.
3 men have been jailed and over £35,000 worth of cocaine and heroin seized in Westminster in an operation by the Metropolitan Police. Said Gwalt and Matt Daniels and Lloyd Brown were imprisoned for a combined total of 17 years. Their charges include the supplying of Class A drugs and possessing firearms and ammunition. The Met has closed over 1,800 lines and arrested over 3,000 county line offenders since November 2019. The UK Health Security Agency is warning the public to avoid some soft cheeses after 3 listeria cases have been confirmed and 1 person has died. The Food Standards Agency issued an alert saying exceptionally high levels of the bacteria have been found in the Baronet soft cheeses and is warning the public to not eat the products. Symptoms of the infection can be similar to flu, but in rare cases can cause serious complications, like meningitis. The Premier League has referred Everton to an independent commission to question reported losses of over £370 million. Everton's loss during the 2021-22 season allegedly breaches the league's profit and financial sustainability rules. They allow clubs to lose a maximum of £105 million over a 3-year period. All face sanctions. Gwyneth Paltrow has testified she initially thought she was being sexually assaulted after a collision with a retired doctor on a ski slope in Utah in 2016. 76-year-old Terry Sanderson is accusing the Oscar-winning actress of crashing into him and says he's living with a permanent traumatic brain injury as a result. He's suing for damages worth £250,000. Miss Paltrow denies the allegations and says she can't be held responsible.
I was skiing and 2 skis came between my skis, forcing my legs apart, and then there was a body pressing against me and there was a very strange grunting noise. So my brain was trying to make sense of what was happening. I thought, is this a practical joke? Is someone like doing something perverted? This is really, really strange.
3 fragments of ancient sculptures from the Parthenon temple that have been held in the Vatican museums for more than 2 centuries have been returned to Athens. They were handed back during a special ceremony at the Acropolis Museum and have since been placed in the Parthenon Gallery. The Greek government is hoping to recover all original sculptures from the Parthenon, including the Elgin marbles, which are currently in the British Museum. The French president says King Charles's visit to France would have lacked sense while protests are happening across the country. Tens of thousands of people have been demonstrating against the government's plan to raise the pension age from 62 to 64. The King and Queen Consort were due to arrive on Sunday as part of a week-long trip to Europe. President Emmanuel Macron has defended postponing their first state visit, suggesting instead a date in the early summer. And servicemen who helped to carry the Queen's coffin in Edinburgh are among those recognised in an honours list. The Royal Regiment of Scotland carried the coffin to St Giles's Cathedral to lie in rest. The Chief Steward of the cathedral also received honours under the Royal Victorian Order, recognising service to the monarch. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Esther and Phil.
Thanks, Bethany. Now, to take a look through the papers this morning, I'm delighted to say that we've got a punchy Saturday panel here with us today. Broadcaster and journalist Carol Malone and TV chef and broadcaster Kevin Woodford. So, Carol, starting with you, I'd say some positive news today.
Yeah, I did a piece of my column today about the fact that World Athletics has now banned trans women from female athletics. And I think, good, about time. It's taken long enough.
Common sense is prevailing.
Completely. It just wasn't fair that a man could suddenly proclaim himself to be a woman and then compete against women. And it was, and we saw it a couple of years ago in that swimming event. But the science now backs up the fact that even after as long as 14 years therapy, hormone reducing, testosterone reducing therapy, that guys still have a 40% greater muscle mass, they're still 20% stronger, and their cardiopulmonary capacity is 20% stronger as well. So, you can't have it. And what I did in the column today was I gave a shout out to two women in particular. A lot of women athletes have joined this fight. But the two that stick out in my mind, and they did it right at the start when nobody else was, is Sharon Davis and Martina Navratilova. Both of those women have suffered the most appalling bullying online, really bad bullying from trans activists, scary stuff, threats. And this is because Navratilova said at the start, she just said, this is insane, it can't happen.
Do you think that another woman who might have helped inadvertently with this is Nicola Sturgeon? I just want to. Do you think that the backlash to her plans has now given confidence to other bodies who think, actually, do you know what? We can make these decisions with a bit more confidence. Before they'd sort of kowtow to all of this sort of trans extremists, what happened to Sturgeon showed people in these kind of positions. Actually, we can actually now. We've got some cover now to make these kind of decisions.
It is interesting that the people who Sturgeon's supporters when she became First Minister 8 years ago, these were ordinary folk, working class folk, and they couldn't believe that she ended up talking about women having penises. They couldn't believe it, and I think she would not backtrack on it.
But they'd all gone down a tunnel, hadn't they? And then they framed the argument. It was anti-trans, not pro-fairness for women and sport, and that was the problem. So lots of people never came into the argument for fear of. Well, they were saying, I'm not anti-trans, actually. That isn't it. I just want to see fairness for women. But you couldn't get that side of the argument.
No, and they didn't want to be labelled as such, and that was one of the problems as well, I think, And there are some confusions, I think, still, and I agree, it's fantastic news. I'm all for it, 100%. But I know that Seb Coe, for example, has already said that they're not saying no forever.
I think that's wrong.
Isn't it?
I think it's real.
The decision's been made. Stick with it, for goodness sake.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody said to me the other night when I was arguing this with someone else, they said, oh, no, he has to say that because the science changes. I said, no, the science does not change. The science says that the guys who become...
He said there, doubt I might have got the argument wrong.
Well,
I mean, that's sort of what it says to other people. Doubt, not sure. Or, I mean, I said you'd written a lot about Sharon Davis. She lost a lot, didn't she?
She lost. Not only did she lose, she had contracts that she'd had for 30 years with various companies, and they all dumped her the minute the trans activists started to threaten them, which I thought was shame on them, frankly. But also, the only reason she was able to carry on was her mother died and left her some money, and she used that money to survive during all of this and lost her reputation. reputation, which is shocking.
Kevin, following on from that, because that was bullying in one way or another, but moving on to your story.
Well, I can't believe this. I mean, you know, we go back to the 13th century when it comes to the legal guys. You know, the legal eagles are barristers who we should have faith in and we should believe in. It's one of those professions that we really depend upon. And you know, what we've got now is 120 of our top lawyers, right, have signed what they call a declaration of conscience, where they refuse to prosecute Extinction Rebellion, you know, Just Stop Oil, all of these lot, you know, and this virtual signalling, I just can't get my head around it at all. I mean, there's a thing within the legal profession, and you'll know this because you've been through, you've got a law degree, right? Which is the cab rule, the same as a taxi rank. If you pull up at Paddington and there's a taxi there, he can't refuse you unless you're drunk, unless you're abusive. You get in that taxi and he takes you where you want. And the barristers have the same thing. They have the cab rule. Do you know what I mean? Now, I just fail to understand why they should allow their personal views, if they're slightly left, and this is what they believe in, that's fine, but that should not prevent them from...
I mean, if you ever say to a barrister, how on earth can you defend a
murderer, a paedophile, exactly.
They'll say, well, our whole legal system is based on the fact that everyone's entitled to be prosecuted, everyone's entitled to a defence, we're just doing our job,
Philip.
whatever.
And do you know what my fear in all of this...
They're saying we're not going to do those
cases. Blown that out. That's blown that out of the water, hasn't it?
But do you know, my fear in all of this is that where does this go to in our society? Do we get a situation beyond that now where the police say, do you know what? I don't think I'm going to bother arresting you today because I
don't agree with this law. So
and we have got some of that, haven't we? Exactly,
we've seen that.
We've seen it. Where they're dancing with them, they're having a nice cup of tea and bringing them a nice warm drink.
This undermines the independence of the legal system totally. And when you look at some of those barristers, those work barristers who are actually doing this, one of them's already been struck off. There's another one who clubbed a fox to death with a bat.
That's right.
I mean, these aren't very nice people.
Isn't this really where you separate out the law from the sentencing?
Yes.
So basically, you've committed the crime, whether you stop people going about the day-to-day, whether you destroyed a painting, whether you vandalised a building. Well, you broke a law. Now, if after that you say there is a mitigation, there is reasons, well, that comes into the sentencing. That doesn't and shouldn't contaminate the fact that you are guilty of a crime.
If they don't like the law, they should stand for Parliament, so they can change the law.
Absolutely,
they shouldn't be embarrassed, should they?
But also these barristers, surely they should be disbarred if they are undermining the legal system which they represent.
Yes.
Suspend them or disbar them entirely, but there's no talk about
that. And not the story, Carol. Or am I going to go to you, Mr. Davis?
As we're on legal hours.
Did I call him Mr. Davis? I'll give you a couple of names. I either call him P. Diddy. That's where I'm in a good mood.
Well, I'm not sure that's clever.
That's P. Diddy.
That's not nice.
Oh, no, that's cute. Well, do you know what? Well, that's like Snoop Dogg. You know, that was like a musical. Or Mr. Davis, or just Davis.
Depending on how well he's behaved.
Why didn't you like it, Carol?
Because it suggests... I can't say it on telly. Diddy. Think what the word Diddy means.
No.
So that's to say you shouldn't say that.
By the way,
what does Diddy mean, Carol? What does it mean? No, what does Diddy mean?
This is like you're at home.
I am here. Anyway, talking about...
Ken Dodd.
Right, OK.
Talking about legal outrages, there was one this week in Parliament which didn't get much coverage, and I like to tell people what's been going on in Parliament that they might have missed. And actually, Esther played a starring role in this, because basically the government changed the law this week. They tried to sneak it through at the end of the day just to be nodded through, and nobody noticed. Esther intervened and made sure that there was actually a vote on it.
So what every MP had to think.
So they actually had to vote, but it still went through. Basically, when Labour were in government, they introduced the law whereby you have to be released halfway through your prison sentence.
Which is shocking enough.
You have to be. You don't become eligible for release.
You have to.
You have to be. So if you get 3 years in prison, you have to be released after 18 months, irrespective of whether you're still a risk to the public or you've misbehaved in prison. It is the law. You have to be released. Now, Labour also introduced something called home detention curfews, which meant that up to 135 days before the halfway mark of your sentence, you could be released out on a tag as well, up to 135 days before the halfway mark.
That's before before the half.
You have to. The stipulation is you have to serve at least a quarter of your sentence in prison.
No.
A quarter. That's the stipulation, right?
You're joking.
The government this week I mean, Lord knows why, have extended that 135 days to 180 days. So you can now be released 180 days before the halfway mark of the prison sentence that was given by the judge.
Which means you serve about 10 minutes.
I mean, the home detention curfew is only applied to people serving under 4 years, but just take 4 years as an example. It means that you could be out of prison in 18 months. You could be a burglar, you could be a repeat burglar that's got 4 years in prison. You have to actually get just under 4 years.
Where is the deterrent?
But so what about the recall? What about recall? So, for example, you're serving 4 years, you're out below 2 years because of this home detention thing, right? But let's say you commit another crime while you're out, then you're back in and you serve the full sentence.
You've stumbled across another outrage there inadvertently, because most people would think, because you're let out on licence, people would think that if you're let out on licence, you commit another offence, you're sent back to prison for the remainder of your sentence. You're not sent back to prison. You are sent back to prison, but only for 28 days. 28 days.
Isn't this because there's not enough prison places?
So there is that, because they said there's 4,000 more people every year going into prison. So they might say that...
Just for balance, I should say, because the government would say this if they were here to defend themselves, which is very difficult to defend themselves over this, but they would say that they have actually removed certain offences now where you can no longer be given a home detention curfew as part of this. So for stalking, harassment, people causing some fear of violence, restraining orders, controlling coercive behaviour, domestic violence, those people now can no longer be put on home detention curfew.
So they serve the full...
They've reduced the criteria for it, but they've extended for those...
You know what, this whole...
But they're still out halfway through.
Yes, they still have to be released halfway through.
So my whole thing about this is honesty in sentencing. And where does the public have confidence if they see somebody put away and they're thinking, good, you've got 4 years there, you're going to be put away, and then to see them out in 18 months' time.
It's like, you know, the whole justice system seems to be skewed in favour of the perpetrator of crime and not the victims. What happens if, you know, victims like us who get burgled and all the rest of it, and you see the bloke out in a couple of months?
And this is where I think you're emboldening the perpetrator or the criminal. Because you would think, well, what does it matter?
I mean, so few of them have actually prosecuted and sent to prison in the first place.
Yes, exactly.
At least it'd be decent to send them to prison for the full sentence.
But what is the point of... Go back to this, you know, recall. I always thought that the recall was that if you know, whatever your sentence was, you've committed another one while you're out, you go back in and you do the full sentence, full stop. You're saying 28... What is the purpose... No, what is the purpose of 28 days? And where does 28 days as a number of sentence days come from?
Well, it's an arbitrary figure. It's like a mini break, isn't it? In fact, I mean,
mini break.
There have been reports of criminals literally deliberately breaching their licence conditions to be sent back to prison.
I think this is...
Because they've got some criminal activity going on in prison just to double-check it's still going.
I think this is one that our viewers might have an opinion on. As I said, I did force...
Are people as outraged as I am about this?
I did make sure people at least voted on that. Some people might or might not have known what they were doing, but I think we've got it. And as I said, for me, it's honesty in sentencing. And you know what? If we're 4,000 prison places too short, it says build another prison. It doesn't say let people out. But I'm going to end on a happier note here. I saw in the papers, it said, my fiancé and I don't drink, so we're only going to serve water at the wedding to save some money. Now, what do we think? Do we think that's... Well, why not? All your friends must know that you only drink water. Why not? Or is that a bit tight?
It's utterly selfish. I get it. My husband doesn't drink, but I get really cross with him when we go places, and he wants to go, like, an hour after we got there because he's not drunk and everyone else is. But I say to him, it was your decision to give up drink. It wasn't my fault. Just live with it. And that's what these two should do.
You're from the restaurant and food world. Do you think that's tight?
No, I think it's horrific. I think it's terrible. And I wouldn't want to go to a wedding where there was only water served. I wouldn't. But you've got to bear in mind there are...
Bring a hip flask.
Absolutely, bring a hip flask. You've also got to bear in mind that I know certain restaurants where the water is often more expensive than the wine. So be careful for what you wish for, is what I'd say.
I have to say, it sounds like they will save money on that as well.
Yeah, they certainly will. So you're going to stay with us. Kevin and Carol, we'll see you at 11 o'clock. Thank you very much indeed. But coming up after the break, we'll be talking to Conservative MP Sir Christopher Chope. You were watching that debate, Philip, yesterday.
I was in Parliament to watch it about vaccine damage payments. I don't think you'll want to miss our interview.
Means a lot to a lot of people, and what are we doing? To see you shortly.
Hello. As we go through the rest of this Saturday, we will have some sunny spells, but also quite a few showers to watch out for. And then later tonight, it's going to turn wet and windy in the south. That's because of this weather system that's currently waiting out in the Atlantic. You can see at the moment we have low pressure fairly nearby. That's why it's a blustery, showery start for many. A little bit of a ridge of high pressure building as we go through this morning. And so that's why things are turning a little bit more settled, perhaps. As we take a closer look through Saturday afternoon, some showery rain across parts of southwest Scotland, lining down towards the southeast of England, and there will also be some showery outbreaks elsewhere too. You can see some showers pushing in across northern parts of Scotland and a few towards the south, though here that's where the sunshine is going to be greatest. Temperatures in the south with the sunshine not doing too badly, a little bit above average for the time of year with highs of 14 or 15 Celsius. Later on we are going to see then this wet and windy weather I mentioned earlier pushing initially across parts of Devon and Cornwall, but then across into parts of Wales, across other southern and central parts of England. A little bit of uncertainty as to how far north this rain's going to get, and it could be quite heavy, perhaps up to 30 millimetres in some places, so it could cause some localised problems. In the south, we are going to see temperatures staying quite mild, but a colder start on Sunday morning in the north because of a northerly flow, leading perhaps to some icy patches where we have some wintry showers. In the south, we are going to see that wet weather clearing away as we go through Sunday morning, so a drier theme into the afternoon, but it is going to be cloudier than today. Further north, some brighter spells mixed in with those wintry showers, but a colder theme because of a northerly wind pushing down, so temperatures for many markedly lower than they are today. As we go through the end of the day on Sunday, most places staying generally dry, but still some showers coming down on that northerly wind. Risk of some wintry ones across parts of Scotland, so again the risk of some ice as we go through Sunday night. And for many it is going to be a colder night, leading into a fairly frosty start on Monday morning. Otherwise Monday does look generally dry but cold, with temperatures then picking up through the week but more unsettled.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 10:25. Now, during the lockdown, many parents said they felt their children's education was abandoned because of lockdown measures that kept them away from the classroom.
Following the reopening of schools, life has not got back to normal. A report from the Centre for Social Justice states tens of thousands of children have failed to return to the classroom. For more on this, we're delighted to be joined by journalist Harriet Sargent. Harriet, thank you for joining us. If anyone wants to read more about this, page 14 and 15 in the Daily Mail, Harriet's got a fantastic double-page article about this. Just explain about ghost children. What's actually happened to these children, and how many are we talking about?
Well, we were all so concentrated on the elderly during the pandemic, and nobody sort of thought, well, how are the children going to cope with all of this? Nobody focused on them. And in fact, even though schools have reopened, an awful lot have gone missing. Now, in 2019, about 60,000 children were out of school more often than in, which is bad enough. A year ago, when I first started looking at this, it was 100,000. And now, even though schools have reopened, and you'd think, children would be skipping back into school, it's now risen to 140,000 children spend more time out of school than in. And a shocking 2 million have not got good attendance. They're sort of just not...
I mean, people talk about that social contract has been broken well and true, so we might come in, we might not. We take Fridays off now because our parents are off, so all of this has had an effect.
Do we know what they're doing, though, these children? Do we? I mean, are they out causing mischief? Are they just at home playing on computer?
Well, I mean, both. I mean, this is what's, I think, very interesting, because it seems to divide roughly in two, that there are certain children who just will not come out of their bedrooms. They just sort of sit in their bedrooms. And there are other children that you can't get off the streets. They've gone and started doing gangs and drug dealing and whatever.
And you've interviewed these children?
Yes, I've interviewed a lot of these children. It's absolutely heartbreaking.
I was going to ask you that. What were they saying to you? How have they polarised?
Well, one of the boys I interviewed, who actually was going to a pretty good sort of school in a leafy suburb of London, he described to me in great detail really how he fell apart. I mean, this was a competitive, articulate, bright boy from dedicated parents, and he started lockdown quite happily, and where it began to disintegrate for him is when he did his homework and none of the teachers marked his work. He was sending in his work religiously and nobody marked it. And he said, what is the point of me competing if I'm not having my homework marked?
So he would have been a high flyer and it had the reverse effect.
So that's an interesting point, because I was wondering, who are these children? Do they come from a certain, demographic background? Are they do they tend to be, poorer children from poorer... But from what you're saying, this could be happening across all sections of society.
Yes, it's happening across all, because there's, the usual vulnerable children who are, for example, children on free school meals are twice as likely to have dropped out than their sort of middle-class contemporaries. Children from disadvantaged backgrounds, and children at pupil referral units, they have all dropped out. But also, I mean, one teacher, she teaches in a very nice, outstanding Ofsted-rated school in a suburb, again, another leafy suburb. And she said that the mental health issues in her girls, it's an all-girls school, is just off the wall.
Well, who was checking what the schools were doing? And surely the trade unions must have some answering to do here. They were the ones wanting to close the school and say protect the teachers, and nobody really thought about the children. And people were speaking at the time saying we can't have lockdown for children. People were coming out. People like Professor Sue Townsend, Us for Them as children's group, and they ignored them.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, the teachers' unions have a lot to answer for, because I think we can all remember the level of hysteria from the teachers' unions, the pressure they put on in newspapers, on the government. And actually, the government, I think, made a big mistake. They conflated the teachers' unions with the interests of the children.
You've called them the ghost children. Are these children now lost forever? Have we got a generation of children now that we've let down and we can't get back into school, back onto the straight and narrow, help them with the jobs and the prospects?
Well, it seems like it, because the numbers are going up. I mean, when I looked at it last year, it was 100,000, and it's gone up to 140,000. And the other really worrying thing, because I interviewed a lot of women who had babies at this time and what they went through. And a lot of the teachers complained that, you know, children were turning up at 4 in nappies, didn't know how to put their coat up on the hook.
Couldn't eat
eat
with a knife and fork.
But there is a reason for this. It's because these poor mothers were just totally abandoned by all the normal services. You didn't have health visitors. You had nothing. And you had mothers sort of very tense, anxious and isolated. And this has had a huge impact on these kids.
Harriet Sargent, thank you so much. As Philip said, it's a big double page in the Mail today. You can read more about those ghost children, and I'm quite sure our viewers will have a lot of comments on this as well. Thank you.
Now, coming up, we'll be talking to Conservative MP Sir Christopher Chope about his vaccine damage payments debate in Parliament yesterday, so stay tuned.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 10:34. Now, yesterday in the House of Commons, Conservative MP Sir Christopher Chope initiated a debate about payments for those people damaged by the COVID vaccine. And we're delighted to say he joins us now. Chris, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I was there for your debate, but can you tell our viewers what it was that you were particularly trying to achieve with your debate yesterday? I know this has been a bit of a personal crusade for you.
Well, it's not just a personal crusade. It's a crusade on behalf of thousands of people who did the right thing, had their vaccines, but for whom the vaccines turned out to be very bad news, either giving them permanent severe injuries or in some cases actually causing people to die. And so I've been campaigning to try and get the government to get on with providing payments to these unfortunate people. And yesterday was an opportunity to try and put more pressure on the government to do just that. And what I did achieve was to get the minister, after about 6 months, to agree to come and meet some of the victims at a meeting of the all-party parliamentary group. So that was the only success. The rest of the event was a repeat of what's happened before, which is basically the government still in denial about the fact that there have been people who have died as a result of the COVID-19 vaccines, which is very depressing because we've had more than 50 coroner's reports confirming that deaths have been caused by the vaccines, and indeed the government itself has been paying out compensation to some of the bereaved relatives. But the government is still unwilling to say publicly that they accept that for some people died as a direct consequence of having taken the vaccines. And so they're in denial, and I'm trying to get them to change their mind. And as part of that, I tried to shame them into action by drawing attention to the contrast between what's happening in our country and what's happening in Germany.
So do you want to tell us the difference then between those two countries, our country and Germany?
Well, funnily enough, in Germany, their new health minister, who's a professor of epidemiology when he's not being a health minister, he originally at the beginning of lockdown was saying to the Germans that there are no side effects from these vaccines and you must do the right thing and take them. Well, in an interview about 10 days ago, he said that what he'd said then was total exaggeration and that he now realized that there were lots of people in Germany, he estimated about 1 in 10,000, who have suffered ill effects from these vaccines, and there are about 300,000 complaints being made to the federal ministry there. And so what they're doing in Germany is recognizing that there are these unfortunate people and recognizing that they must do something about treating and diagnosing what's called post-vaccine syndrome. Our government,
how did it go
yesterday,
down
were
with the
unwilling
minister?
to agree that there is such a thing as post-vaccine syndrome, and certainly not prepared to admit that any money should be invested in addressing this. And yet they've set up long COVID clinics, but they won't set up clinics for the people who are suffering as a result of the vaccines. So unfortunately, despite describing what was happening in Germany and the very direct way in which the German minister is now apologising for having misled people at the outset, we didn't really get much change out of our minister, I'm afraid.
Chris, when you said that the government are refusing to accept that people are dying or having these serious consequences as a direct result of taking the vaccine, does that mean that the government aren't paying out anybody under the Vaccine Damage Payments Act? Are they refusing to pay anybody out? Or are we in an even more extraordinary position where they're paying people out compensation privately and publicly denying that there's that there's a problem.
Yeah, well, Phil, it's the latter. They are paying some people out, but still publicly denying any liability. But there's also some sort of funny business going on, I think, because when the first payments were being made, they were coming through quite quickly, and much was made of the independent assessors looking at these cases. But what's been happening more recently is that those independent assessors are being overseen and second-guessed by government reviewers. And funnily enough, I had an email this morning from a constituent whose case has been held up by over 2 months since he had the independent assessors agreed his case, but now it's subject to a government review. And I'm a suspicious person, and I think probably what's happening is that the government is now trying to basically change the assessments that are being made by these independent assessors and reduce the number of people whose claims are successful.
Christopher Chope, thank you very much indeed, and keep doing what you're doing. Sceptical, hard-working, whatever you want to call him, somebody who rigorously goes through the details to support those people.
It was a terrific debate, Esther. I mean, Chris is a brilliant debater, and
but the thing is,
very good.
Phil, as he said, it's on the coroner's report
exactly.
that the cause of death has been. So you've got that proof. Then they've been paid out by the government, so there is that proof. But people are still in denial and don't want to talk about it.
I don't see. I mean, it doesn't seem to me to be impossible to say we think that overall the vaccines were a good thing, but yes, we accept that some people have. It's been a terrible thing, and we accept liability.
And government has always had that. That's why you have vaccine damages payouts, because we've always had that. So you need to.
I don't know why they're so reluctant, but anyway, I don't think Chris Chope's going to give it up.
Oh, we know he's not. He'll be battling on there, despite the abuse and the trolling he gets online. Now, the government is offering financial support of up to £3,000 and a flight home to migrants if they voluntarily leave the UK. The support also applies to people who are here illegally and includes assistance with documentation, including obtaining a passport. Ivan Sampson, the immigration lawyer, now joins us. So sort of explain that to us. They're here illegally and we're giving them £3,000 to go home.
It's not as simple as that, because the cost of sending somebody enforcing removal is £15,000 to £20,000. So it actually costs a lot more money to remove somebody forcibly than for them to go back voluntarily. That's the first point. So in itself, the headline looks great. It looks like people are being paid to go back. But no, it actually makes economic sense. The problem is the restrictions of those who can actually apply. Most people don't qualify. And what I mean by that is that you've got to be either under 18 or under 21 and a carer, or you've got to go back as a family. So lots of people that are overstaying or here legally simply don't come within the rules. Which may explain why since 2014, when it was brought in, the numbers have steadily declined to about 2,500 a year. But the wider problem is we're just simply not removing anybody. The peak was 2012. We removed 50,000 people a year, and that's gone down by as much as 70%. And the latest figures we have is we removed 9,000 people, of which 2,500 were voluntary returns. Germany removes more people in 6 months, twice as many as we remove in 12 months.
So as an immigration lawyer yourself, are you good at making sure people are leaving the country, or do you try and put up an appeal for them to keep them here?
Well, I follow my clients' instructions. I don't decide what my clients do, first of all. So most people,
an appeal
my
could
clients,
be a way then, and you might not be saying, how about the £3,000 to go home? You're happy to say, well, why don't you try and appeal and stay here?
Well, no, I follow my clients' instructions. If my clients want to stay here, then I would advise them accordingly. But the government always puts those proposals to people. So, and for example, if you're under 18, you can use this scheme. I think that's immoral. If there's children under 18 who want to go back, the government are quite happy to pay them £3,000 to do that. That's an immoral policy. Also, if you've been trafficked and you've been deemed to be trafficked here into the UK, the government are quite happy to give you £3,000. And if you're under 18 as well and you've been trafficked, they're quite happy for you to give you £3,000 to go home, and it's not our problem anymore. Look, we have moral obligations to people fleeing here, people who've been trafficked, people who are refugees, people seeking humanitarian protection. It all costs money. So either we comply with our moral obligations as a civilized society, or we simply say, do you know what, it's all about the money. We don't want to pay for you. Go home. So I think this policy is not great, which shows why it doesn't work.
The thing is, I mean, you say, I mean, I understand the argument, Ivan, that, you know, it costs more to forcibly remove somebody. So if you can get them to voluntarily leave for £3,000, that's good value for money. But surely there's a matter of principle here as well. You know, that if you're here illegally, you shouldn't be sort of, in effect, financially benefit from that status. Sure, I mean, it's like me saying, well, look, you know, I'm a criminal. If you give me £100,000, I promise not to commit another crime again. And in the long run, that'll be cheaper for the taxpayer. I mean, at some point, you've got to say, well, actually, that's just not acceptable. And so, do you not think that people are right to be outraged that the government are paying people who are here illegally, whose asylum application has failed, and they're getting money in order to do what they should be doing anyway, which is leaving the country?
No, I don't agree with that. I think it's absolutely acceptable to do that because, as I said, it's cheaper. But also, then we can put our resources towards removing those that don't want to go back. And this is look, we've got up to 1 million people illegally in the UK. I'm absolutely all for removing anyone who doesn't have leave to be here. I don't want my children to be walking the streets with people who are legally, we don't know where they are, where they come from.
But they've already had a decision and saying they shouldn't be here, but you're helping them to do an appeal and question that decision, even though they've been told they shouldn't be here. They failed their claim.
Well, you forget one thing, and that's Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. So everyone has a right to family and private life. That's the law. That's what we signed up to. We drafted that. So we can't sort of have a law and say, well, there's your rights. But you know what? Don't even enforce those rights because you're here illegally. No, the law is the law, I'm afraid, and we've got to comply with the obligations we have under international treaties. No, if somebody's got a family here and they're here legally, they've got every right to remain here on the basis of that family life.
No, Ivan, we understand that. I'm interested. You said there were 1 million people here illegally, which we're all outraged about. You're an immigration lawyer, so you've got far more expertise in this field than we have or most people have. So if you were the government and your task was to get rid of these people who are here illegally, what should the government be doing to effectively remove these people who are here illegally that we don't seem able to shift?
We can't. Look, if we let's say tomorrow, the 1 million people turn up at Heathrow and say, do you know what, we want to go home. It would take decades to remove them, first of all. It's simply not workable. What we have to do is have an amnesty.
That sounds a bit defeatist to me. I don't believe it would take that long. That sounds defeatist. I'm quite sure we could get the planes going and get them moving out.
I'm afraid not, because most of these people don't have any documentation of who they are. And just to get all of that sorted out would take decades. It would take every flight over the next decade to do that. No, it's been thought through. This has been considered. We simply can't do it. What we've got to do
Ivan, we'll put this to our viewers and see what they think. But thank you for explaining. And this is why people talk about the European Court of Human Rights and different people having rights and then lawyers. I'm quite sure they'd go to appeal and want to have to go to appeal because they get paid for that rather than making sure they leave the country.
It was sobering, though, that wasn't it?
It absolutely was.
Even if you want to remove them, it's impossible to do so. That was...
said the immigration lawyer.
Yeah, that was very sobering.
It just shows the mindset. They don't want to remove people. But Grant says here, we've got your views coming in. I've got them here. Grant said, I discovered my son stopped doing homework for a month. This is in regard to the Harriet Sargent interview we did about the ghost children and how they were basically abandoned during lockdown. And Grant said, but when I brought this up with his teacher, she said parents should be ensuring homework is submitted and took zero responsibility for the children. Shocking. I have no respect for the profession after lockdown. They were just out for themselves, said Grant.
Yeah, Lynn says here, this is a shocking one as well. Lynn says, my grandson, who's now 13, was a straight-A student at junior school. He was top of the class in every subject, and we had high hopes he would go to grammar school because we had the 11-plus system in Kent. Then lockdown happened. He was sent some work home, but obviously not enough to see him through the 11-plus education. It wasn't being marked either. Imagine how he felt when he got his results and he hadn't passed. Even his teachers couldn't believe it.
There you go. And William says it wasn't just home that wasn't being marked during lockdown, but universities were going missing as well. It just was a bad time altogether for pupils of whatever age they were. So thank you for those views. Keep them coming in.
Now, a Bradford author has claimed to have revealed the real story of the Yorkshire Ripper's trial in a new book published last week. Richard Cobb claims to have written the most comprehensive study on the courtroom drama that was dubbed the trial of the century.
Well, we're delighted to say that Richard joins us more to tell us more. Joins us now, sorry, to tell us more. So, Richard, why did you feel compelled to write this book?
Basically, I want to basically tell for the first time the actual story of the trial. I brought a book out in 2019 called On the Trail of the Yorkshire Ripper. And it was all about the crime scenes and crime scene locations. And I realised I had a lot of material left from the actual trial. And when I looked at all the other books, I realised that nobody had covered the trial in great detail. Most books dedicate about 2 pages to the actual trial. But when you read the trial, suddenly there's so much more in there. I mean, a lot of people aren't aware that the prosecution defence had an actual agreement about where Sutcliffe would actually go to prison or not. They had all agreed that he was mentally unsound, diminished responsibility. It was supposed to be a formality. When they got the trial, the judge read the reports, the doctor's reports as well, and thought to himself, but the only reason you think he's mad is because he's told you this should really be put to a jury. And the jury went through all the evidence. It then became public knowledge. And then we suddenly realised this man wasn't actually mad at all. He was actually evil. He planned all the murders. There was a sexual element to the murders. And he was found guilty. And it really is a fascinating tale. Had he been locked away in an asylum as planned, he possibly could have been free within 10 years. Back in those days, if the person was found insane, it wasn't up to the judge to release the person, it was up to the doctors. This all had to be changed in later years. But as we now know, he was faking the illness. He could have easily got out in 10 years' time as a cured man. But luckily, he was found guilty, and the judge then was able to put a minimum sentence of 30 years, later on changed to a whole life tariff. I went through the reports. I have, for the first time ever, all the doctors' reports on Peter Sutcliffe. When you read the reports, you find that even one of the doctors assessed him as mentally ill within 10 minutes of meeting him. I mean, 10 minutes.
Richard, I was going to ask you, what are the most shocking things that you discovered from this trial? Apart from that one, that's shocking enough. He could have been back out on the streets. But what did you yourself get moved or gripped by?
I was basically a lot of things that you don't read about much. I mean, you find out for the first time that Peter Sutcliffe was actually taking his friends out on car journeys, on kind of reconnaissance missions. He would go out, he would get them all drinking, they'd fall asleep in the back of his car, and some of them would wake up and they'd find themselves in the red light district, and he wasn't in the car. So basically, he was going out, bringing his friends to the red light district, going out hunting around and back in again, probably as some kind of form of alibi for himself for later on. We find out about how he was captured and how basically how close he was to getting away with the actual murders. Even when arrested in Sheffield, they were going to release him. And it wasn't until 24 hours later, when the original arresting officer came back on duty, he realised something very significant about where Peter Sutcliffe was. He went back to check, and that's when the weapons were found. So when you read the book, you realise how close Sutcliffe actually came to getting away with all these murders.
I mean, Richard. I mean, I know you. I think you live in Bradford now. Peter Sutcliffe was actually born and brought up in my constituency in Bingley, and obviously we all know how he terrorised the people of West Yorkshire, particularly for many years. I just want to come back to this point about the defence about diminished responsibility and trying to avoid a murder conviction. And I thought that was fascinating, what you said about how that was pretty much a done deal. Am I right in thinking, then, that turned out to be his defence during the trial, that it wasn't murder, it was manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, and that he was only convicted by a majority vote of the jury and not unanimously?
Yes, that's right. When he went to court... when he first was arrested, he kind of confessed completely all the murders and why he did it. By the time he came to court, he'd changed that whole story to the fact that he was working in Bingley Cemetery. And he was at a gravestone, and the gravestone apparently had the voice of God instructing him on how to go out and rid the world of prostitutes. Then brought to court, he claimed diminished responsibility. And this was hopefully to get him off the murder charge, so he would claim that he was guilty to the assaults, but he wasn't guilty to the murders because of the grounds of diminished responsibility. Basically, the doctors had really kind of give him this angle, because when they interviewed him, they actually said to him, "Do you hear voices? Is somebody telling you to do things?" So even they were leading him down the road. Now, at the trial, which I found really fascinating, was that he did display a lot of symptoms to the doctors. He had certain hallucinations, certain ways of looking at things. And you'd think, well, how could anyone possibly be able to mimic this, fake this? Then we realized in the court reports that his wife had also suffered a similar schizophrenic episode in her life, which lasted a good few years. And it was Sutcliffe who nursed her out of it. So basically, he had all the symptoms she had when she was going through her episode.
Richard Cobb,
Richard, I'd love to. I'm going to have to meet you in Bradford, I think, and have a chat with you more about this. I'd particularly like to talk to you about the crime scenes, because I always say to lots of the civil liberties people that actually, I reckon if we'd had DNA technology and CCTV cameras like we have now, he probably would have been convicted after the first offence rather than killing so many people. I'd love to have a chat with you. We haven't got time now. I'm going to come to Bradford next time I'm in Bradford. I'll try and meet up with you and have a chat about that.
Absolutely fascinating
story. So that's the book.
How many times he
got
away? He nearly got away, and how many times he was
arrested. The book, Convicting the Yorkshire Ripper: The Trial of Peter Sutcliffe. So if you're interested in that, go to your local bookshop and buy it.
That's it for this hour. But coming up, we'll be reviewing the newspapers with journalist and broadcaster Carol Malone, as well as TV chef Kevin Woodford. So stay tuned.
Hello. As we go through the rest of this Saturday, we will have some sunny spells, but also quite a few showers to watch out for. And then later tonight, it's going to turn wet and windy in the south. That's because of this weather system that's currently waiting out in the Atlantic. You can see at the moment we have low pressure fairly nearby. That's why it's a blustery, showery start for many. A little bit of a ridge of high pressure building as we go through this morning. And so that's why things are turning a little bit more settled, perhaps. As we take a closer look through Saturday afternoon, some showery rain across parts of southwest Scotland, lining down towards the southeast of England, and there will also be some showery outbreaks elsewhere too. You can see some showers pushing in across northern parts of Scotland and a few towards the south, though here that's where the sunshine is going to be greatest. Temperatures in the south with the sunshine not doing too badly, a little bit above average for the time of year with highs of 14 or 15 Celsius. Later on we are going to see then this wet and windy weather I mentioned earlier pushing initially across parts of Devon and Cornwall, but then across into parts of Wales, across other southern and central parts of England. A little bit of uncertainty as to how far north this rain's going to get, and it could be quite heavy, perhaps up to 30 millimetres in some places, so it could cause some localised problems. In the south we are going to see temperatures staying quite mild, but a colder start on Sunday morning in the north because of a northerly flow, leading to perhaps to some icy patches where we have some wintry showers. In the south, we are going to see that wet weather clearing away as we go through Sunday morning, so a drier theme into the afternoon, but it is going to be cloudier than today. Further north, some brighter spells mixed in with those wintry showers, but a colder theme because of a northerly wind pushing down, so temperatures for many markedly lower than they are today. As we go through the end of the day on Sunday, most places staying generally dry, but still some showers coming down on that northerly wind. Risk of some wintry ones across parts of Scotland. So again, the risk of some ice as we go through Sunday night. And for many, it is going to be a colder night, leading into a fairly frosty start on Monday morning. Otherwise, Monday does look generally dry but cold, with temperatures then picking up through the week, but more unsettled.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the second hour of Saturday Morning with Esther and Phil here on GB News. If you like the first hour, there's a second hour too, because we've got loads coming up for you, including...
Is a new axis of evil forming between Russia and China? Michael Day, the chief foreign commentator from the newspaper, will be joining us to discuss that.
And bike sales, push bike sales across the UK have fallen to a 20-year low as the pandemic boom in cycling comes to an end. We'll be speaking to 2 experts to see if Britain is really coming off the saddle.
And we'll have all the latest in showbiz and sport as Chris Scudder and Hayley Palmer will be joining us in the studio.
And as ever, we want to hear from you. We've been hearing from you. We've got your comments, but we'd like some more. So email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. But before we start all of our show stories today, here's the latest headlines with Bethany.
Good morning, it's 3 minutes past 11. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The head of the Fire Brigade Union is calling for mass non-cooperation and non-compliance with the government's new anti-strike laws. The minimum service level bill would give ministers the power to force certain union members in key sectors to work on strike days or face losing their jobs. The FBU General Secretary Matt Rack says the bill is one of the most draconian attacks on the rights of working people in decades. He's urging the Trades Union Congress to hold an emergency meeting to launch a joint strategy to resist the legislation.
Basically force workers to cross picket lines which are being manned by their colleagues. A, I think it is completely unprincipled and unethical, and B, I just don't think it would work. The idea that workers are going to be strong-armed into breaking a strike that they've voted for, I think is just fanciful. So in the end, I think this bill, it certainly is a backward bill, and it's going to inflame the situation and, in my view, make the strife even worse.
3 men have been jailed and over £35,000 worth of cocaine and heroin seized in Westminster in an operation by the Metropolitan Police. Saeed Ghatal, Max Daniels and Lloyd Brown have been imprisoned for a combined total of 17 years. Their charges include the supplying of Class A drugs and possessing firearms and ammunition. The Met has closed over 1,800 lines and arrested over 3,000 county line offenders since November 2019. The UK Health Security Agency is warning the public to avoid some soft cheeses after 3 listeria cases have been confirmed and 1 person has died. The Food Standards Agency issued an alert saying exceptionally high levels of the bacteria have been found in Barnett soft cheeses and the product is being recalled. They're urging customers to not eat the cheese and to contact their retailer. Symptoms of infection can be similar to flu, but in rare cases can cause serious complications like meningitis. London City Hall staff will no longer have access to TikTok on their work devices. The Greater London Authority says it takes information security extremely seriously. It follows similar bans imposed on government ministers in the Palace of Westminster and in the Scottish Government. TikTok, which is owned by the Chinese internet company ByteDance, argues it doesn't share data with China and says these bans are based on fundamental misconceptions. One of Britain's leading retail consultants has warned John Lewis Group faces a battle to regain its soul and warned failure for the retail giant was not an option. Mary Portas has published an open letter to the chair, Sharon White, following the news she was considering ending the employee-owned business structure to attract outside investment. John Lewis, which employs 80,000 workers, has also warned of potential job cuts and told staff it would not hand out a bonus for only the second time since 1953. The Premier League has referred Everton to an independent commission to question reported losses of over £370 million. Everton's loss during the 2021-22 season allegedly breaches the league's profit and financial sustainability rules. They allow clubs to lose a maximum of £105 million over a 3-year period or face sanctions. Gwyneth Paltrow has testified she initially thought she was being sexually assaulted after a collision with a retired doctor on a ski slope in Utah back in 2016. 76-year-old Terry Sanderson is accusing the Oscar-winning actress of crashing into him and says he's living with permanent traumatic brain injury as a result. He's suing for damages worth £250,000, but Miss Paltrow denies the allegations and says she can't be held responsible.
I was skiing and 2 skis came between my skis, forcing my legs apart, and then there was a body pressing against me and there was a very strange grunting noise. So my brain was trying to make sense of what was happening. I thought, is this a practical joke? Is someone like doing something perverted? This is really, really strange.
3 fragments of ancient sculptures from the Parthenon temple that have been held in Vatican museums for more than 2 centuries have been returned to Athens. They were handed back during a special ceremony at the Acropolis Museum and have since been placed in the Parthenon Gallery. The Greek government is hoping to recover all original sculptures from the Parthenon, including the Elgin marbles, which are currently in the British Museum. Servicemen who helped to carry the Queen's coffin in Edinburgh are among those recognised in an honours list. The Royal Regiment of Scotland carried the coffin to St Giles's Cathedral to lie in rest. The Chief Steward of the Cathedral also received honours under the Royal Victorian Order, recognising service to the monarch. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Esther and Phil.
Thanks, Bethany. And now to help us look through the papers this morning, we're delighted to be joined again in the studio by broadcaster and journalist Carol Malone and TV chef and broadcaster Kevin Woodford. Now, I'm just going to read out this comment from a viewer, Nick, and he says, wow, Phil's revelations about prisoners and paltry sentences served as a real eye-opener. Sounds like Phil knows his stuff too, though he said, I feel sorry for Esther. That does seem to be a lot of bedtime reading. Yes, you're quite right. It certainly is. But you know what's even worse, and I feel like I'm confiding you, Nick. We do, like, of a night
Steady
out.
on now.
We talk these things through together late at night as well. Oh, have you seen what's going on? Have you seen this amendment and clause? Hence, I was the one who stood up and actually made sure and forced there was a vote, because we'd been going through the fine detail.
Between the windsets. And a little cup of cocoa.
Who said romance was dead?
You're not painting a good picture.
No, not at all. No.
This isn't marriage bliss. This is... See, we found each other. What can I tell you, Carol?
Yeah.
Go on, we'll start with you on the royal story.
Yes, I'm talking about the fact that Emmanuel Macron, France's president, has cancelled the 4-day state visit with Charles and Camilla. And he's done this, he says, out of respect for Charles and esteem for the pair, and out of respect for the British people. Well, you know that's a lie for a start, because he doesn't give a stuff about the British people, as we've seen in recent years. Though he's cancelled it because this is a massive humiliation for him. He can't control the mob in his own country. And not only they've been on for 10 days, the riots, so they've hit Paris, they've set Paris alight, but also they've set Bordeaux alight as well, which is where they were going to go. But Buckingham Palace officials are angry because Macron made it sound like it was a joint decision. And the British officials here said, no, it was not a joint decision. We would have gone very happily and made the best of what there was. But and so they're cross at Macron, making it look like they decided together when it's Macron who's done it. So yeah, I mean, this is a massive humiliation for him. Charles's visit was the first state visit for Camilla and Charles after the Queen had died. It was supposed to seal post-Brexit relations, and now they've had to back down because, you know, I hate strikes, OK? And I really think they're a blunt tool in the 21st century. However, the French don't muck about, do they? They don't do, like, 2 strikes every month. They just set cities on fire. So and he can't control
Has Macron lost control of the country now? Because this isn't new.
So.
It's gone on for a long period of time, hasn't it, these demonstrations? Yeah. But I'd say he's lost control. And, of course, they were trying to get rid of him. He thought his government could have fallen the way he forced the vote through. Yeah. No democracy there.
Incredible arrogance.
He'd use his edict and sort of push it through without a vote.
You think about Britain, and if they imposed that pension thing on us, which they actually have in the past, we would probably just grumble a bit and then we'd accept it. In France, they're just setting fire to the place.
But Charles is also saying, I read in the Eye front page here, he wants a more active role in UK diplomacy. He was disappointed the trip didn't go away. Do you think he should be becoming more, using his skills, more diplomacy, going out there to...
To be honest, I don't think he's going to placate the mob. And I think probably his security...
I just meant between the EU and the different countries using his diplomatic role there, not stopping the riots.
I don't really want him interfering, Esther.
No.
We've seen what he's done in the past. past, you know, with all the spidery writing letters years ago when he was always, you know, bothering the government. That's not his role.
And didn't he make an assurance that...
he wouldn't do that.
That he wouldn't do
Exactly.
that. But, I mean...
He's got the job now.
He's got the job. So it doesn't...
Yeah.
He never signed that contract, so he's got the job. No, I think you're right. I think, you know, we're going to see more of King Charles becoming very, very involved in what should be happening, you know. And do you know what I love, Carol? I love the bit about Macron when, you know, because he's a man of the people now, he took his watch off, his expensive watch.
Oh, yes, this is a great
because there was a
point,
shot of while he's talking about, you know, the poor people. This is Marie Antoinette, isn't it, again?
Well,
Let them eat cake.
But, you know, the watch is something called Bell & Ross. I've never heard of it. It's not that posh. And it costs £2,000. Now, OK, £2,000's a lot of money. But, you know, a Rolex is about 20. So I could see him taking a Rolex off, slipping it when he was talking about the minimum wage. But you actually see him on telly. You see him slipping it off his wrist like that and putting his arm back.
Nobody would have noticed if he'd just kept it on. Nobody would have said anything. He's actually drawn attention to it by taking it.
It's deeply embarrassing. You either wear a watch because you want to wear it, or you don't because you don't think it's right. But to try and sneak it off in the middle of
and is there an argument that says, you know, he's really got the 20 grand Rolex stashed at home and he wears that when he's not in public, and he puts the cheap £2,000 watch on so that people think he's a man of the people.
No, exactly.
You'd expect, what are they wanting to wear? Timex to look good. He's not going to do that.
A nice little swatch.
Your next story?
Well, you know, I start my day, and I always have, no matter where I am in the world, it doesn't matter where I am in the world, the first thing I have to have is a triple espresso. No joke. I have 3 espressos every morning, shot of milk.
3 single, 3 double.
I put them together, 3 doubles, extra strong.
Wow, that's...
I do it every day. I know it's crazy.
I do too, but you're beating them.
Hardcore. Proper northern
Remember,
lad.
I've been up all night looking at the blooming amendments to whatever. I need the double espresso.
Yeah. So that's what I do. And there is all this theory, isn't there, about the coffee and what it does, you know, insomnia, nervousness, restlessness, it gives you a tummy ache, it can give you the, you know...
Yeah,
toilet.
don't go there, Kevin.
Don't go there.
We get the picture, Kevin.
You get the picture, right, OK. And I accept all that. I haven't suffered from anything. I have a coffee in the morning. I couldn't have it at night because it would make me a bit uncomfortable. But... here we go. I love the academics and I love research that happens with the academics, and they spend money on a waste of time. So in America, in New England, they decided what they needed to do was do research into coffee. So they got this group of 20 people, locked them away, and they said, right, drink as much coffee as you can. And they monitored them. And they found out that the more coffee that they drank, the further they walked. Right?
Oh,
so
really?
they actually calculated that the more coffee they had, they would walk an extra 1,000 steps. Then they stopped them having any coffee at all. So it was completely banned. They couldn't drink coffee. They were locked away, and they became nervous. I'm not surprised they became nervous, for goodness sake.
Yeah, they all have a heart attack.
And absolutely. And you've got to say to yourself, why would anybody commission and pay for that?
What was the purpose of this? I mean,
it was part of a medical journal. It was to do with sort of the effects upon coffee. Does it make you go... I don't know whether it makes me go any faster or any further. I just couldn't start the day without one, is the fact of the matter.
You're always lively, though. You're always lively.
That's because he's had his 3 espressos. Phil?
Well, there's a page 10 of the Times. On Monday and Tuesday next week, the illegal migration bill comes back to the House of Commons for amendments.
Yeah.
And it says here, so it must be true, that Downing Street are in a panic about some of the amendments that have been tabled to the illegal migration bill, particularly one where they believe that more than 60 Conservative MPs will back an amendment that will instruct British courts to ignore rulings by the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. This is an amendment tabled by Danny Kruger MP.
And if you'd heard that interview a little bit earlier with our immigration lawyer, there'll be more people signing it.
I don't know whether Danny will move his amendment to a vote, but I probably will. If my whip is watching this programme, I can tell her exclusively here that if he does move that, I will vote for his amendment to ignore rulings by the European Court of Human Rights. Because, you know, a sovereign nation should be able to control its own borders, surely.
You know, in the German constitution, they actually have a little addendum in their constitution which says they can ignore the European Court if it's something that adversely affects their country. So if they can do it, why can't we?
Well, the last Labour government did ignore when the European Court of Human Rights wrongly, I think even they would accept wrongly, said that prisoners should have the vote.
Yeah.
The last Labour government just ignored that ruling, quite rightly so, in my opinion. So there is a precedent for doing that, and I think that this will be very sensible. I mean, I suppose you could argue we don't actually need to pass a law to say to ignore it. We could just ignore it.
Or look at it the other way. If you lose the vote, because all of the Labour people will vote
Then you
against
can't
it. You
ignore it
send
then.
out a very bad message, and then you can't ignore it. At the moment, you don't know if you can
No,
or you
that's a very
can't,
good
therefore
point.
you can ignore it. So I can see why Number 10 are worried here, because you then say, we must, and you've got in law. Thank you, that's why we discuss all this for so
well,
long.
you shouldn't. You
We'll
should be
have a-
doing other things.
we'll have a-
reading books.
We'll have a further discussion tonight where we...
Right, well, I'm going to go to this one, the Cambridge Don. This
Here you
is
go.
in the Mail here. You've got to look at the picture that goes
Well,
with
or
it.
not. No, you
don't-
Or
or
not.
not.
Preferably not.
The Cambridge Don, who says, why the fuss about me turning up naked to a black tie champagne reception at the Royal Economic Society? I'll tell you why. You were naked. Everybody else had clothes on, but I believe she did put a necklace on.
Oh, that's
and
good.
she did
all right
have
then.
long gloves on,
well then,
but she
yeah.
was taken aside, probably to check, or as my grandma used to say, feel her bumps. Was she OK? Did she need any medical
What?
help?
What did your
She
grandma
said,
say?
feel your bumps.
Feel your bumps.
Now, that sounds wrong, doesn't it, with this
feels very
story?
wrong.
But
Just
it
a
was
bit.
on your head.
Stop digging.
But equally, what I'm wondering about, why can't you get your point across with your clothes on?
Well,
and if you're a Don and an academic, why shouldn't you be winning the debate verbally?
She's not going to get any point across by turning up naked, because people aren't going to be listening. They're going to be looking at her. And, you know, I just think that's really... It just makes people feel uncomfortable. Why didn't she think about that? You know, I mean...
It's a bit tricky when you're eating the soup, isn't it?
Well,
I mean, if a bit any spillage there, that
well,
could be...
that's
not
where
good,
it could
Philip.
possibly go. It's just disgusting.
But it is. Well, maybe that was it. It was to make people feel uncomfortable. It was, in a way, to
I bet it
dominate,
would.
which you might not otherwise be able to do. A very quick one at the end. When did you last hug each other and mean it? This is the importance of hugs. 5 hugs a day to boost
That's what I like,
happiness.
yeah.
Every time you have a piece of fruit, have a hug, and then you both cover both off at the same time.
It says aim for 5 seconds, kiss every day. It can be a peck or a snog, and even the briefest touch can help couples
And you
to
two
bond.
can't do that because you're busy reading
No,
papers.
yeah,
and you've got,
people
Well, you
No.
don't
got all
know,
the
do
stuff.
you? You don't
How can you
know.
be
We
here?
might
Well,
play little amendment games.
where's the time?
Do you like 5 hugs a day, Carol?
You know, if I was giving my husband 5 hugs a day, he would think I was having an affair. He would think something had gone wrong. So,
Flowers out the blue, same thing,
Yeah,
isn't
same
it? Why
complete,
did
isn't
we
it?
have that?
No.
Oh, no, because you're an old romantic.
I am an old man. 5's not enough, for goodness sake. I had 5 before my coffee.
Well, that's it for you. They were walking, those people had all that coffee. You're non-stop hugging.
Correct.
Espressos,
Absolutely.
non-stop
if you're
hugging.
hanging on for 5 seconds, that's quite a long time, really,
Yeah,
isn't it?
hanging on.
like hanging on.
Hanging on, that sounds you're not enjoying it.
No, but
hanging
you
on.
are, but you know, you're busy, you know, things to do, you're running out the door.
Well, do you know what?
Later.
Well, yes, just like we have now. Other guests to see, other
all
people
right,
to
okay.
speak to.
No more hugging.
That's us dismissed.
Kevin, Carol, can I say fantastic?
You can go out and have a hug now.
Yeah, we will.
We've already had one out there. We just had one before we came in.
Yeah, we did.
Have you back any time.
Oh, bless you.
But coming up, as ties between Russia and China strengthen, we'll be asking if there is a new so-called axis of evil, and it's forming right here and now, and what we're going to do about it. So stay with us.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fantastic. That was it. We were doing the hugs, making me feel better. Do you feel better after that hug?
Yeah, I think so.
Marginally.
I might need another one just to decide.
Right, I've got these views coming in. One of them said straight away, of course Philip must have enjoyed that hug, Esther. Jill said, I think your immigration solicitor said it all. They would just open the doors and let everyone in. We do not want illegal immigrants here. So there you go. I have to say, Jill, I'm with you on that one.
And actually, we were talking with Harriet Sargent earlier about the ghost children and talking about whether or not the teachers had done a good enough job at making sure that kids were looked after during lockdown. Some views in defending teachers here. Yvonne says, having listened to how much is being blamed on teachers during the lockdown, I would like to share what my daughter, who is a teacher, went through. Every day she would say online lessons, sometimes just written lessons, but she'd also record lessons online too. She'd check who hadn't been online and completed them. She'd speak to the parents, mark all the lessons and speak to the children as well every week. Our daughter worked incredibly hard to ensure that the children didn't fall behind, and we were incredibly proud of her. She was working harder than if she had been at school. And Em says something very similar.
I think that's why it's worth reading Harriet Sargent's article, because she did say some were doing amazing work and going above and beyond, and others weren't. And that's also part of the problem, who was getting the help, who wasn't. And it went down to schools and individual teachers. But thank you for those comments. Now, is a new axis of evil forming between Russia and China? That's the question Western leaders have been pondering after Xi Jinping joined Vladimir Putin in Moscow to discuss relations between the two nations, as well as the conflict in Ukraine.
The Chinese Premier's visit to Russia came days after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for President Putin on war crimes allegations.
We're joined now by Chief Foreign Commentator for the newspaper, Michael Day. Well, I've been reading this and following it closely, and I'm wondering, is there something here that we need to be aware of, alert of, concerned about, this axis of evil?
Good morning. Well, clearly there is an alliance between Russia and China, and it's based on the fact that it's an opposition to the West, I think. They're fed up with Western power. China, in particular, is angered and frightened by the ability of the West to launch sanctions against it. So there clearly is an alliance. And it's the fact that China's tacit support for the war in Ukraine has clearly focused our attention on it, I think.
Michael, is it an axis of evil? Is it just an axis of convenience? What is it that each wants from the other?
Well, I'm not going to use the word evil. That's for people to decide themselves. It's a partnership of convenience, certainly. Russia is very, very isolated at the moment. I mean, most of the world is horrified by its barbaric war on Ukraine. China, however, sees this as Russia as a useful partner in opposing the West, in opposing Western dominance of the world. So it doesn't care about how many people Ukraine and Russia kills in Ukraine. It's not bothered. Don't forget, China is a country that's got 1 million Uyghurs locked up in concentration camps. It's not really bothered about human rights. It's all about, opposing the West. I think what China, in the long term, what China would like to do, of course, is replace the dollar as the world's reserve currency, because America, don't forget, American power, it's not about its navy, it's not about its nuclear arsenal, it's about its ability to slap sanctions on virtually any company in the world, because the US dollar accounts for 60% of the world's reserve currencies. And so there are all sorts of plans afoot, digital currencies, perhaps promoting the Chinese renminbi, the Chinese its own currency to replace it, but that's going to take a very long time to happen.
Michael,
so in the media,
is it sensible for the Chinese to be closely associating themselves with somebody where there's somebody who's an international pariah, where there's in effect a warrant out for their arrest to go before the international criminal courts? I mean, it seems quite a dangerous strategy for a big country that's wanting to maximise its influence around the world to do that.
It is. I mean, this week we saw this so-called peace initiative on the part of Xi Jinping when he was in Russia. He announced a peace plan, and that was shot down in flames pretty quickly, wasn't it? It coincides with the Chinese, I think, this global security initiative. And if you look at that, the second main point in this security initiative is for calling on the world to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations, in brackets, except Ukraine, clearly. So that was shot down in flames by most of the world. And we heard just before this meeting in Moscow that Xi Jinping might actually be meeting President Zelensky. Now, because I think Zelensky suggested this, there's no sign of it so far. If he doesn't meet Zelensky, then China trying to promote itself as trying to bring peace will look completely hollow. And there's no sign of this phone call between Zelensky and Xi yet. He seems to be running scared, I think.
But looking at it from another angle, I'm quite sure China would want peace as such. They need to sell their goods. They need the world not spending out and concerned with other things, with the cost of living crisis. They are looking for domination of their products around the world. Is this what could really be the motivation behind the peace process?
No, that's a good point. I mean, because of course the Chinese economy has its own problems at the moment. There's a property crisis. You know, we had the ridiculous zero COVID policy, which was a disaster. You know, there are trade sanctions. There was a trade war. There are still trade barriers up in place. And I think the failed peace initiative this week was partly to try and bring Europe on board a bit more, soften relations with Europe, because China is desperate. It might not like the West, but it desperately needs to trade with us. And it's already, relations with the US are practically in a deep freeze. The last thing it wants is to completely cut off relations with the other great trading bloc of the world, the EU. And so you're right, the war is not doing China any favours. But at the same time, I think Xi has kind of staked his reputation with Putin on Russia not losing. So he's between a rock and a hard place, I think.
Michael,
and in the meantime, the war goes on and people are suffering.
We've got to get to the news, but just very quickly, if you could, there have been reports of the UK supplying depleted uranium shells to the Ukraine. How serious an escalation would that be if that were to happen, do you think?
No, I don't think it will be. I don't think it is. I think what we ought to be doing is giving Ukraine everything it needs to finish this war. See, we keep talking about these red lines. I think these red lines, first it was medium distance missiles, then it was tanks, and we keep crossing these supposed red lines. The red lines are things that we invent in our minds and Putin encourages, so we don't give Ukraine what it needs to defend itself. I mean, I think we need to hopefully get this conflict finished within 2 years before we have someone like DeSantis or Trump in the White House. I don't know what would happen there, but it wouldn't be pretty.
Michael Day. We said it together.
Stereo.
Michael Day, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Still to come on Saturday morning, we'll be taking a look at...
Esther, thank you. Good morning, it's 11:32. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. The head of the Fire Brigade Union is calling for mass non-cooperation with the government's new anti-strike laws. The minimum service level bill would give ministers the power to force union members in key sectors to work on strike days or face losing their jobs. FBU General Secretary Matt Rack says the bill is one of the most draconian attacks on the rights of working people in decades. 3 men have been jailed and over £35,000 worth of cocaine and heroin seized in a major operation by the Met Police in Westminster. Saeed Ghatal, Max Daniels and Lloyd Brown have been imprisoned for a combined total of 17 years. Their charges include the supplying of Class A drugs and possessing firearms and ammunition. The Met has arrested over 3,000 county line offenders since November 2019. One of Britain's leading retail consultants has warned John Lewis Group faces a battle to regain its soul. Mary Portas published an open letter to Chair Sharon White following the news she was considering ending the employee-owned business structure to attract outside investment. John Lewis, which employs 80,000 workers, has also warned of potential job cuts and said it won't give staff a bonus for only the second time since 1953. And Gwyneth Paltrow has testified she initially thought she was being sexually assaulted after a collision with a retired doctor on a ski slope in Utah in 2016. 76-year-old Terry Sanderson is accusing the Oscar-winning actress of crashing into him and says he's living with a permanent traumatic brain injury as a result. He's suing for damages worth £250,000, but Miss Paltrow denies the allegations and says she can't be held responsible. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's back to Esther and Phil.
Thanks, Bethany. Bike sales have dipped to their lowest level in 2 decades as the pandemic boom in cycling has turned to bust.
Many people who took up cycling during the lockdown period have lost their enthusiasm, it seems, with one analyst estimating that only half of those who bought a bike during the pandemic are still riding it. I can't say
you didn't even buy it. The only one you bought was a pedal one that stays on the spot.
I knew I was leading with my chin on this one, to be honest, because I've got an exercise bike and never use it. So I'm one of those.
This doesn't even move anywhere.
Yeah, it's all right. Anyway, let's not. But Richard Pascoe, the chief executive of the Paran International Cycling Scheme, and Amy Radcliffe of the Bike to Work Scheme join us now. Thank you both for joining us. Amy, if we start with you. I mean, can we accept that sort of peak bicycling as we've reached it now, and we're now on a downward trend of people using their bikes?
I don't think so. Not from our side, anyway. We're seeing lots of people still going through the scheme. National insurance on your bike, and your employer will pay for it up front. So obviously, with the cost of living.
Can we try and get Amy? Amy, we'll come back to you. Your sound isn't wonderful, so we'll go and speak to Richard first. But I must say that the Bicycle Association annual market data report said that sales fell by 22% last year. That's a quarter below the pre-COVID levels, and child bikes are even lower than that. So is Richard still there? Here he is. So do you agree then that bike sales have tipped off? Less people are enthused to go cycling. We seem to... Oh, all right. Well, we'll come back to the...
Not having much luck there, are we?
Yeah, they don't like the questions. Is that what it is? They don't... But what is... Go on, Phil.
Well, I was thinking to myself, I mean, I understand bike sales have fallen, but it seems to me, I don't know, I don't understand the maths behind it, but it seems to me a bit of a... it doesn't necessarily mean that fewer people are cycling, does it?
It also had only half of those who bought a bike during the pandemic as using it as well. Oh, I get that. But I think that question, is it peak? I know we were all told we had to, and the cycle lanes, and we want to get fitter, and we've got 15-minute cities, but sometimes the government telling you what to do doesn't always mean the public want to do it. But Amy, you were telling us about your scheme, and again, this is a government-funded scheme, and another way to get people on the bike, they're supporting with the cost of bikes, aren't they, and giving a sort of a tax return on it.
Yeah, definitely. They make the tax and national insurance saving through the gross pay, where they take the deductions from. And then basically the employer saves, the employee saves. Obviously, it's getting people into bike shops, and we're also helping the environment at the same time.
I just wondered, though, Amy, if there are fewer people now cycling, or people who have bought them are not using them as much as they were doing perhaps during lockdown, obviously lots of councils have been, and the government have been spending fortunes on cycle lanes and all the rest of it. Do you think that it will follow on, that there'll be a backlash to all these cycle lanes if fewer people are actually cycling?
I don't think so. I think as we get further into the cost of living crisis, I do think people will uptake the scheme even more. I think that...
No. OK, Phil... OK, Amy Ratcliffe, I'm really, really sorry. We just couldn't get the sound there. But basically, I think she's saying, and I get the argument there, that if there's a cost of living crisis where you don't have to pay petrol, you can get around, you don't have to pay for bus fares, I get that. However, in this country, whether you're isolated in a village, whether you just don't want to cycle somewhere if you're off to an important meeting, people are not all choosing to be on a bike, despite everything the government said. Like you said, you've got cycle lanes, we're giving this tax deduction scheme. We couldn't have bribed more people to go onto a bike.
Well, I mean, where my constituency is, there's lots of hills and everything, and they're still obsessed with trying to promote cycling in places where, you've no chance.
And what do we say on the road now? Roads, busy roads in London, can't be driven down because they've taken a huge lane out for cycling. And if it was all about, as well, the environment, there's more environmental issues there because they're all 2 lanes of chock-a-block traffic.
Be interesting to know what our viewers think. Do you think there might be a backlash to more cycle lanes in particular? Probably might be anyway, to be perfectly honest, but there may well be even more of a backlash if fewer people are cycling. It seems to be pointless.
You never see anybody on a cycle lane.
I think that the councils and the government need to really rethink this, to be perfectly honest.
Active travel schemes.
Anyway, we know what Esther thinks now, anyway. Coming up, all the latest from the world of showbiz and sport. So stay tuned while we have another hug.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know,
All
Kate
sorts
Moss?
of Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 11:43. Cambridgeshire County Council has approved plans to fell hundreds of trees through an orchard designated, I should say, as an area of natural importance in order to build a new busway designed to, yes, you've guessed it, combat climate change.
Despite opposition from campaign groups, the council approved the plans 33 to 26. It comes as campaigners in Plymouth have won a bid to continue a High Court injunction preventing the further felling of trees in their city centre.
For more on this, we're delighted to say that we're joined by James Littlewood, CEO of Cambridge Past, Present and Future. So will those trees be past, present or future? Did you hear us there,
we hope that they will be the future.
Exactly. So this seems to be very muddled thought by different green initiatives. So you've got the green environmental wanting to keep the trees, and then you've got the green net zero wanting to cut down the trees and put, as they'd see it, public transport there. Who's going to win?
Well, we're hoping that we're going to win. It's not quite as simple as buses or trees. So we've put forward an alternative scheme which would enable the buses to bypass the traffic. So we're still proposing a bus scheme. It's just a scheme that goes on a different route and doesn't cut down all of the trees. We're particularly concerned about some of the arguments being made by councillors regarding the greenness of their scheme. For example, their scheme would involve pouring large amounts of concrete, including a new bridge over the M11, and that all generates carbon emissions. And it also includes a park and ride site, so encourages people to drive there in the first place, and then they do the last part of their journey by bus rather. So it's not as green as they think it is. And when you take into account all the trees that will be destroyed, there's a much greener scheme that we're proposing, and we don't understand why, if they're so interested in the green scheme, they don't want to pursue that instead.
I'm with you, James.
Yeah, I mean, James, I'm with you too, James, to be honest. I mean, I think it's complete vandalism, councils taking down all of these trees, many of which have been around for, hundreds of years. I just wonder, do you think that there's something that the government should be doing in terms of protecting trees around the country? Because obviously this seems to be happening in a number of places. We've had it in Sheffield as well as Plymouth and now in Cambridgeshire. Should the government be doing something to try and stop this from happening around the country? Or is this a matter for local democracy?
I think this probably is a matter for local democracy, but interestingly, Natural England are looking at the moment at whether traditional orchards like the one at Coton, which will be destroyed, should be classed as irreplaceable habitats. The reason for that is it takes them at least 50 or 60 years to create the mosaic of habitats which gives them their value. So if you say, well, we're going to chop down all those trees but we're going to plant some new ones, that's fine, but it's going to be 50 or 60 years before the value of those trees reaches the level that they are from the ones that you've destroyed. So I think the government can look at, particularly where you've got habitats that take a long time to re-establish, whether they can give greater protection to them, put more value on them, so that people proposing schemes have to take that value into account. It might be a financial value, for example. It might be more expensive if you do the environmentally harmful thing.
Do you have any sympathy for one of the councillors who said, well, they'd read the UN report published this week, how urgent it was to decarbonise our economies and move to net zero, as if she was panically doing the first thing she thought? Do you have any sympathy for her?
No, not really, because in this instance, we're proposing a scheme. So we're not saying don't have a busway. We're saying have a busway, but just have a bus lane next to the road, you know, which bypasses the traffic. You don't need a dedicated road for a bus, which chops down the tree.
Yeah. So your argument makes a huge amount of sense to me. So why aren't they listening? Why can't they understand what you're trying to say?
Well, we're incredibly frustrated that they won't. I think part of this is that the leadership has, you know, invested £10 million to get to this stage so far. It's taken them 9 years. They don't want to admit that they might have made the wrong decision and that investment and time they've spent has been wasted. And so I think this is one of those cases where it's about doubling down, carrying on and hoping the Treasury won't pay too much attention to it.
Just carry on going. You've done the plan. Keep going.
James, I just wonder, where's the campaign now? Because the council have passed these plans. So, I mean, is that not it? Or are you hoping for another vote in the council to reverse their decision?
I think the political decision has gone, but it now goes to public inquiry. So we will take our case to the public inquiry. We've started a fighting fund. We're raising funds to pay for professional experts to help us win at that inquiry. People want to support that, they can go online and look for Safe Coat and Orchard.
James, just a quick one. Are you going to tie yourself to the trees to protect it? Are you going to, all of you, line up and tie yourself to the trees?
There's lots of people saying they're going to lay down in front of the bulldozers, yes.
James Littlewood, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well,
we wish them well.
We totally
protecting the trees.
But that would be awful if it's just because they feel, oh, we've done the paperwork, so we've got to go ahead with it, irrespective of whether it's a good or bad decision.
Absolutely. Now, let's take a look at the biggest stories from the world of sport and showbiz with the wonderful Hayley Palmer. But you might notice we haven't got Aidan McGee with us. We've upgraded. We've upgraded this week. We've got. He doesn't know. He doesn't know I've just said that. So
I don't think he's watching from Battling.
We've got the great.
He's on a stag week. He's on a stag week.
He's on a stag do. We've got the great Chris Scudder here, who's a sub off the. It's like getting Phil Foden off the bench. To be perfectly honest.
Yeah, but he came off after about 3 minutes the other night. Then he came on. On you go, Phil. Off you come, Phil. After sending off. But
anyway, sport.
Yeah. I was just going to say, actually, talking about the trees thing, just very quickly. Do you remember Swampy?
Yes, we do.
Newbury bypass.
Yeah, that's right.
I was living quite close to that. That was amazing, wasn't it? When that bloke was stuck up the tree.
All right, we've got Swampy's son now.
Yeah.
He's going against HS2.
Best thing that ever happened to Newbury, get that bypass, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, I used to drive up that from Portsmouth up to Wales, and it did make a big difference.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely.
But you don't want to take trees down, no.
Anyway, England internationals and what's going on?
Yeah, you're going to play football tomorrow. I mean, Scotland and Wales this afternoon for the Euros. Because, we're all hoping that there'll be a lot of British teams in the Euros finals next year. Wales and Scotland both kind of transition. Wales playing in Croatia tonight, really tough first qualifying game for them. And of course they've got no Gareth Bale anymore. So the man who's carried that team to 3 major finals really. So they've got some kids coming through. Might be a bit of transition for Wales. They've got Turkey in their group as well. Scotland are playing in about 2 hours from now. They're playing Cyprus at home. They should win that today. Yeah. And they've got Spain on Tuesday night. They've got a tough group. They've got Norway as well with Erling Haaland. So.
And England playing Ukraine?
Ukraine, yeah, but they beat Italy the other night, so fantastic. Ukraine tomorrow, which is going to be quite emotional, really. I think I was in Cardiff when Ukraine played the World Cup playoff. Remember, it was about last summer, and all the Ukrainians were there. And I think there'll be quite a lot at Wembley tomorrow as well. Some of the stories I heard, my town was bombed this morning. I mean, stuff you can't even believe it.
Just tell Bethany in the news was telling us about Everton Football Club. Just tell us what's going on. What's going on at Everton?
Does financial fair play, does that mean anything to anybody? Well, basically, the Premier League allow you to lose so much money every year. Everton have lost far too much. You're allowed to lose £35 million a year, £105 million over 3 seasons. Given all the money that's coming into football from television rights, how do they manage to do that? Answer, they play the players too much. But Everton managed to lose £371 million over 3 years.
And they're near the bottom of the table. They're near the bottom of the table. What have they been doing with all the money?
Them and Man City are being investigated. It's been an independent commission is looking at what they call an alleged breach of profitability and sustainability rules. So in other words, you're spending too much money.
So basically, you say you're bankrupt.
If
you're a business,
if you carry
you're
on
bust.
like this, you're going to go bust.
Well, at least Man City have got something to show for their overspending, if they have been overspending.
And of course, the argument, but you buy your way to the title. Everton have spent a fortune and they're down at the bottom.
So this is like a financial investigation into the club and where money's going.
If Everton go down, they've got big trouble. You know, because they're saying they're going to keep the players on at the same wages next year.
Well, I definitely want them staying up.
It's only alleged at this stage.
Yes, of course.
You know,
keep your eye on that story and where it's going.
Massive amount of money. I mean,
Hayley, I don't know whether you've been following this story about Gwyneth Paltrow and what she's in court. Tell us a bit more.
I've been following her outfits, which she's been wearing. I know that's besides the point, but actually, this is insane. This happened in 2016, and a guy called Terry Sanderson has said that she bumped into him on the ski slopes, and she's saying it's the other way around. Now, she's saying that she felt that she allegedly was almost assaulted because she just didn't know where it came from. But I think, hang on a minute, he's broken 4 ribs. He was in a lot of pain. Of course he was going to be maybe making some noises that she's saying that he made. My favourite bit about the whole thing is that apparently Gwyneth's team have been giving sweets to the security in the courtroom. Now, I've never heard of that before, but that's really the sort of thing. No, she's not.
Is that
no, it's not allowed anymore.
It is, Brian. You shouldn't be doing that. But Mike, I just wonder why anybody would have gone to court over this. Why is she? Does she think she's trying to get her career back on track? Because I don't think this is going to end well, is it? This
she's
court
only defending,
case.
isn't she? She's defending herself.
Yeah, but did she need to? No, because he came to her and he asked for £240,000. He asked for a certain amount of money, and she countersued him for £1.
Well,
I'm just saying, is it helpful for her to go to court? What's it going to do?
Well, he's saying he's got permanent traumatic brain injury, 4 broken ribs, pain, suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, emotional distress and disfigurement. So he's
but he came to her to
seems
settle
quite a low claim for all that, doesn't it?
Yeah, but
to be perfectly honest.
It must have been a hell of a bang. I mean, you know, 4 ribs and...
Apparently they're going to bring her children into witness now, because apparently they were there. Apple, her daughter, was at the bottom of the slopes. So let's see what happens next.
Now, I was interested, Hayley,
it doesn't bode well, this, to me.
About Johnny Depp, who said that he's loving life in his Somerset mansion. He lived the quiet life in Somerset. And then I saw it was a £13 million, 850-acre place. I thought, well, no wonder you're enjoying life there, then.
I mean, do you know, a lot of these
Was it mixing or not with the locals?
Yes. A lot of these big Hollywood stars, though, they do like the quiet life. I mean, Phil, you said to me, Hayley, I don't know how you go out every night.
No, I do say that.
Just come say naturally. We have this discussion a lot, don't we?
Yeah.
Do you like the quiet life, Chris?
It's good to get away from the busy and then be able to come. I live close enough to London to enjoy the benefits of London, but when you can escape as well. That's the best.
We're too busy reading Acts of Parliament in bed, to be honest, to be going out.
We need a staff night out.
And what about this other, which was a strange case, being bribed by your friend, this Alison?
Yeah, I've been reading that this morning, and I feel really sorry for her, Alison Hammond, because she's at her peak of her career. She's the golden girl at the moment. She's doing so well. She just got the news that she's going to be on Bake Off, which is amazing. And apparently it's a friend that has been saying to her, unless you give me money or buy me a car, I'm going to sell things to the paper about you. So I do feel sorry for her because it's a horrible place to be.
Hayley, thank you very much indeed for the latest showbiz there, and also Chris Scudder as well for giving us the sport. Now, look, that's it for us today. We'll be back next Friday. Now, next is Saturday, GB News on Saturday with Bev Turn, but we want to give a huge shout-out to our close friend, wonderful colleague, wonderful broadcaster and journalist. That was Alistair, who isn't with us anymore. He's retired, but we love you. We're going to stay mates with you. But
exactly. He was such a friendly person as well. He was not just a great broadcaster, but just a really supportive, friendly colleague, and we're going to miss him massively. But he's going to be an impossible act to follow. But if anybody can fill those shoes, it's Bev Turner, and she's up next.
Hello. As we go through the rest of this Saturday, we will have some sunny spells, but also quite a few showers to watch out for. And then later tonight, it's going to turn wet and windy in the south. That's because of this weather system that's currently waiting out in the Atlantic. You can see at the moment we have low pressure fairly nearby. That's why it's a blustery, showery start for many. A little bit of a ridge of high pressure building as we go through this morning. And so that's why things are turning a little bit more settled, perhaps. As we take a closer look through Saturday afternoon, some showery rain across parts